morning, everybody, and welcome to our final session on year-end procedures for the year 2019. My name is Jeanette, and I will be your guide today through the steps in most of the applications for getting through the year-end. So our agenda for today is we're going to be talking about preparing for year-end before we jump into the applications. So just a few things about that. We're going to talk about the application starting with accounts payable. And the reason I'm doing it that way is because some of you might not have the payroll module. And so after we get through with general ledger, if those of you that don't have payroll can go ahead and step out of the meeting at that point and not have to listen through to something that you don't have. After accounts payable, we're going to go through some of the other applications that sometimes people will forget about because they don't have actual month-end procedures, or they do and they don't have a year-end procedure. So we're going to cover a couple of those extra applications just briefly to point out what you need to do when you are at year-end for those applications. We're going to spend some time in general ledger. We're going to talk about, reconciling to the other applications, making sure that everything is posted, going ahead and closing in a timely fashion, and then what to do once your year-end adjustments come through, or if something else comes through that was accidentally left out and it needs to be part of the year-end. And then lastly, we're going to talk about payroll and go through some of the steps that you need to do to get ready for closing the year. We'll talk a bit about running W-2s. All right, so first I want to talk about backups just for a few minutes. You want to make sure, or you should be making sure at this point, that you do have a regular backup that's happening at night after everybody's off the system, and you're backing up a full backup of your Sage software as well as the data, your current data folders. And I would even recommend that you preserve an off-site copy, just in case something happens at your office and something happens to your backup copies of your media, that you have something that you can bring in from off-site that will help you get back up and running. Of course, the reason for this is if something does happen to your system, you don't want to have to go back and have to re-enter or re-key data to get yourself back up to where you need to be. And then always for use as a reference. So if you need to go back and restore something from a previous backup, you have some place to go to get that backup that you can restore to a different drive or a different folder name, and you can use that to do research. Now, additionally, each application has its own set of files that we're going to talk about as we go through each application prior to doing the close year, because you might be doing that, during the day where other people have actually gone in and done some work. You want to make sure that you have a backup that you can restore of those files before the year-end close, just in case something happens. So we're going to talk a bit about using file tools inside Sage 300 to back up the specific files for each module. Now, you will do your close year. You should be doing it with everyone off the system. And in some cases, it's going to tell you that it can't close the year until everybody is out. So you don't need to worry that if something happens and you have to restore a backup that you're going to lose any information, because people will not be running the software while you're doing that year-end close. All right, let's talk about the year-end releases. We're only supporting, or only have one supported version for this year-end, and it's 18.4.1. which is now available at sagecity.com/year-end, as well as the taxes. Now, I didn't realize that emails were not going out announcing that the releases were ready, And so what I have attached to the meeting, along with the documents that we're going to be covering today, there is a document there that talks about signing up at Sage City to receive notifications. So instead of emails, they're going to send, if you've signed up to that website, they will send you a notice that the releases or documentation or whatever it is actually ready to be downloaded. Now, I have actually, just to show you what you're going to need to go into, I have, let's see if I can find it here. Let me get back here to the Sage desktop, and then let me get out here. If you go to the year-end center, okay, so I've gone to sagecity.com/year-end, and you'll get a screen that looks like this, where you can select the United States down here in the corner, and you'll see Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate. And if you click there, you'll see updates over here on the side. And so what you want to look for are software updates. And what you'll see right here, this is the link to download the latest version of 18.4.1, which is the year-end release. Okay. So it'll walk you through downloading the software. Now, the other thing that is ready, and we're going to talk about this when we get into payroll, are the taxes for 2020. And so you don't actually have to download those, even though I've got that on the web or the PowerPoint here. This can actually be done inside the software. So I'm going to demonstrate that to you today. So the only thing that you need to really download from that website is the year-end version. Now, the document that is that we attached to the meeting talks about receiving the notices. This is the knowledge base article that talks you through going into Sage City and setting yourself up, and then going to the notifications area, and it just walks you through how you want to get the email and so on, and then saving it. And then once you do that, anytime they make an update to the Sage City website, you'll get a notification of that. Right. So for today, I just want to make sure then that everybody knows that that release is now available. And so is the year-end guide for 2019. We put a link in and sent you the guide for 2018, again, not knowing that the year-end guide for 2019 was ready. There's not many changes between the two, but I would go ahead from the Sage City website, I would go ahead and download the 2019 year-end guide just to have it as a reference as you go through your year-end procedures. Right, support closures for both Sage and OnPoint were closed next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, and then the following Wednesday for New Year's Day. So just to make a note of that. Also, now is the time, if you haven't done so already, to get enough paper. If you are going to be printing the copies of the W-2s and 1099s that you are going to send out to employees and vendors, you need to make sure you have enough perforated 4-part blank paper. The rest of the copies can be printed on just plain blank paper. So I've got some slides in here talking about the forms for the W-2s and for the 1099s as far as what you're going to need. Now, in addition to the year-end guide and the document about getting notices from the Sage City website, there are also 2 other documents that were attached to the go-to meeting, one for creating a completed jobs folder and one for creating a prior year payroll folder that I will talk to you about and mention to you as we get into those applications. So again, all of these documents are attached to the go-to meeting invitation. They're on the panel for the go-to web session that you can download and print. So I would at least download those before the end of the session today so that you at least have them online and you can print them out later if you haven't already. Back to the forms, if you need to calculate the number of forms that you're going to need, there is a report inside Payroll for W-2s under Reports, Tax Preparation, called W-2 Count. And for 1099s, if you run the Reports Miscellaneous 1099 Preparation Report, that will also give you a number so that you know how much paper you need to have, how much blank perforated paper you'll need to print the forms. That is, if you are going to print them yourself, you won't need the perforated paper if you're going to let Atrix print and distribute your forms for you. All right, so we're ready to start with our first application. We're going to be talking about accounts payable first. And if you are following along in the guide, this starts on, if you have the 2018 guide, this starts on page 16. If you're looking at the 2019 guide, this starts on page 17. So what we're talking about here is what you need to do to prepare to close the year in AP and to run your forms. So first, you want to make sure that you have enough paper, perforated blank paper, to run your forms if you're going to be the one printing them. And then you need to, at some point, verify that your year-end dates are set correct. You need to make sure everything that needs to be recorded for 2019 as far as payments are concerned are entered and posted. Then you need to go ahead and run your 1099 preparation report. Make sure that the information that is needed on the forms and that the vendors are marked correctly to print the forms, that is done. And then lastly, you'll do a final run of your 1099s. Now you can actually do test runs prior to doing that final run. If you wanted to go ahead and do both a 1099 preparation report and do a test run of the forms themselves, that is perfectly fine. And then you just need to make sure you do the final run before the deadline, and then either have Atrix do the e-filing for you and maybe even the printing and distributing, or if you're printing them yourself and then mailing those in, just make sure that that's all done before the deadline. I want to go ahead and jump in before we talk about this. I'm going to jump us into accounts payable, and I want to just point out a few things. Under File, Company Settings, AP Settings, I always like at year-end to point this out to everyone to make sure that you are actually in the current year. AP does not have a month-end procedure. It does it on a year-to-date accumulation. We have a current year, a last year, and a next year field. So if you forgot to close the year last year and these dates are sitting at 2018, you need to go ahead and run your close year prior to running your first run of invoices or checks in 2020 so that the numbers in the master file shift around and you haven't lost the information that you need. Right? So verify that these dates in AP settings are correct. And then on the vendors, let me show you where I'm talking about on this information. On the 1099 settings button, these are the fields down here at the bottom that are crucial to those dates. If you're sitting in 2018 and that's the value that's in this year, and 2019 is sitting in next year, you need to get that number back over here into this year. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to run your forms. And if you've posted anything for 2020, it may end up in this bucket as well. So by running the close year and getting these values shifted around, you can have 2019 still sitting in the this year field. 2020 is going to go into the next year bucket. So you don't have to, immediately starting January 1st, you don't have to close the year. You can leave 2019 in this field and not run your close year until after you run your 1099s for 2019. Now, additionally on this tab, you want to make sure that if the vendor is supposed to receive a form, make sure that this box is checkmarked. If you have new vendors and you forgot to mark this box, it's still okay, because regardless of whether this box is checked or not, these buckets down here at the bottom will accumulate. The only thing that this checkbox does is it prevents a form from printing when you do the 1099 test run or you run the 1099 preparation report. The vendor will not show up there. So make sure that this box is checked. Make sure that you've got a recipient's tax ID in here. This is either a federal ID or it's a Social Security number, depending on the type of vendor. If it's a Social Security number here could be a subcontractor that's doing business as a different company name. You can put their name here in the second field, and it will print on the form with their name doing business as the vendor name. And then down below, make sure you've got the right form type marked. If you have a vendor who receives multiple 1099 form types, you can turn on audit setup activity. You can use the same vendor ID all year long, then turn on audit setup activity and or mark the form, and then come down here and change the amount to what belongs on that form. And then after you run the first form, come back in here, switch the form type, change the amount to what it should be for that, again, for that particular form type. The only other choice you have is to have two different vendor IDs. Now, the other thing to be aware of is if your company has multiple companies in General Ledger in the same data folder and you're using the same vendor ID to print or to write checks, but you need multiple forms based on the company, you have an option again here in AP settings to retain totals per GL prefix. And if you have this check marked, it will keep separate running totals for you in the AP master file. And when you run your forms, it will ask you to select a GL prefix. And then you'll do multiple 1099 runs, and that vendor will get more than one 1099 form. If you forget to switch this on during the year, under Tools, there is an option to maintain prefix totals. If you run that option, it will reset those totals for you. So if you run your 1099 preparation report and those numbers don't look right, you can run this step here and it should correct it for you. The 1099 report is here under Reports, and it's under Miscellaneous, and again, it's called 1099 Preparation. And again, you can run this report. If you're marked to store by GL prefix, you can tell it to run by fiscal entity. If this little window does not come up, then that check mark in AP settings is not marked. Right, after you have finished the year, oh, let me go back into AP. I forgot one little step here to show you. Actually closing the year. It's under tasks, and there are 2 close year programs. Depending on your fiscal setting, which what we're talking about there is your general ledger, you may run the close year at a different time during the year than you run the close 1099 year. Close 1099 year is for a calendar year. So this is going to roll the information on the 1099 settings tab on the vendor. If if both are set to a calendar year, you're going to run both these programs one right after the other. Again, closing the the fiscal year at the same time that you close the 1099 year. 2 separate programs, run them back to back. It's a very simple screen, just shows you what the current year is and what the new year is going to be. Just hit the start button and it will roll the dates in AP settings, plus it rolls the buckets in the vendor master file. Right, file maintenance. At some point, either at year end or maybe even during the year, if you are a large company and you do a large volume of invoices and checks or electronic fund transfers, you need to do some maintenance by moving your checks from current to history. And then once that's done, you want to compact your files. The reason you want to do this is AP is a little different than the other applications. Every time you enter an invoice, it not only posts that invoice transaction to the current file, it also creates an invoice record in the AP master file. You get an invoice record plus a distribution record for every line of distributions that you record against that invoice. That takes up space. So if you're doing, hundreds of invoices a month, your AP master file is continuing to grow and grow at a large rate. You may see that your reports are starting to run slower and slower. And that's because it's having to sort through all of that older data to get to the stuff that you might need on your aging report or a current year invoice report. Okay. You need to move that information out, and then you need to run Tools, File Doctor, and Compact Good Files. Just moving the information from one file to another does not free up the space that those records took up in the original file. Running the compact will compress the data back down, make the file size smaller, and that's going to cause your reports to run faster. I'm going to point this out in Accounts Receivable, and I'm going to point it out in Job Cost, because those are the 2 other modules that where you have a lot of data coming through, and the more older data that you have that the software has to sift through, the slower the system is going to run, the slower the reports are going to run. Okay. Now I've got a list on this particular screen. These are the files that you should be backing up with Tools, File Tools, prior to running Close Year, either Close 1099 year or Close Fiscal Year, just so that you have a copy of these files just in case something happens, a power outage, somebody accidentally shuts a machine down in the middle. You can't recover from something like that, so you would have to restore your backup files. Right. Property management is listed in, and it's in your guide. It actually starts on page 22 if you are in the new guide, 21, if you're looking at last year's guide. This just, again, walks you through posting all the entries for the year, again, making a backup. This doesn't have a close year program. It's just close month. And then running a test run of your 1099 forms, interest, mortgage interest through Atrix. And then just going forward. There's not too much to it. If you do any archiving, if you archive any leases, again, you want to run the compact, again, to make your files smaller. All right, we're going to start talking now about the other, some of the other applications. So this is on page 25 if you're in the new guide, 24 if you are in the 2018 guide. And it's basically the same steps that we talked about in AP. You want to make sure that everything has been posted, entered and posted for the year. Then you want to go ahead and get your month-end reports printed out. I didn't mention in AP, you should also be reconciling back to general ledger. You should have a routine for that. Run an aging report as of the end of the year and compare that to your AP account in general ledger. Same in accounts receivable. Run an aging report. Compare that to your AR account in general ledger. Make a backup. And then close the year. AR does not have a close month, just like AP does not. You want to make sure that you verify that your date or dates. You may have to close more than once, depending on how far back you are. And then again, you have a move task that you can run under Tools. Move your paid invoices to history. This is another one where the longer you leave older data on your system, the slower the system is going to run as far as your reports are concerned. Now, one other thing to keep in mind in all these applications, the longer you wait to do these moves, the longer the moves are going to take. So it could be, if you've never done an archive or a move, and now you're going to do it after several years, it could be that these moves are going to take hours. And so it may be that you're going to have to run them at night when no one else is on the system. Because again, in some of these cases, you can't have any of the other applications up and running and using your files for verification. And so you may get the message if you start the move that it can't because the files are in use. And so you may have to wait, make sure that everybody is out of the system, you've got a backup, and then you can start and run the move and let it run at night unattended. All right, cash management does have a year-end close. It doesn't have close month, again, just like AP and AR. You want to make sure that you've got your 2019, any adjustments have been put in and posted through with Edit Register. Outstanding checks are in. Make sure that, again, the date in CM settings is set right. Again, make a backup. And then run tasks, close year. Now, I want to show you what cash management actually does because it's not much. So I'm going to actually open up cash management here. On your bank account, you will only have one tab that close year pertains to, and that's this interest tab. It's the only place in cash management on the master file where you're storing a total year to date, next year, last year. This is the screen that gets affected when you run close year. If you're not recording interest interest income and you're not using a special type in Edit Register when you record that, then this tab isn't going to have anything on it. You still need to go ahead and close the year so that you keep up here with this year-ending date. I think you might run into problems with transactions that are dated too far out in the future if you don't. So even if you're not recording a special code on that interest income, still go ahead and run the close year program so that that date stays current. And then again, move older entries to history. If you open up Edit Register and you're trying to find something and you've got stuff in there that is years and years old, and you try to do a find or a search on a more current transaction, it's going to take a long time for the system to find it because it has to sort through all of those entries in the register file. So I would go ahead and at some point, maybe only keep, a year to 2 years of older entries there. But if you're Edit Register, if you scroll through that and you see things that are 10 years old, you need to move that stuff out and then go ahead and run compact again. Now, one thing to remember on all of these things, moving stuff to history does not mean that you lose that information. It's still there. It's just not sitting in the current file anymore. If you need to report or run an inquiry on something that's been moved, just simply select the history file instead. That information is still there. Contracts, you should be running close month. It is the same as job cost. So if you're running the contracts module and job cost, at the same time that you close the month in job cost, you should be closing the month in contracts. And the system knows based on, the dates in your settings when it's going to be rolling into a new year. So that's why there's no year-end close in the contracts or the job cost module. Again, if you want to move some of your older contracts out, if you change the status on the contract to completed and then closed, you can then move them to history. And then again, run compact on your contract files so that things, again, run a little bit faster. Same with equipment cost. If you're running equipment, you just simply run through a month end, print your reports, make your backup, and close the month. Equipment does not have a close year, so you're simply continuing to close the month every month. Same for job cost. We don't have a close year. So again, you're just verifying that everything has been posted, printing your month-end reports, making your backup, and then closing your month. Now, I do want to talk about maintenance in job cost because this is, again, another application that the more data you have out there, the slower the reports are going to run. And so what I have attached to the web meeting for you are the steps to create a closed job folder. And I want to demonstrate this to you so that, and talk about why this is a good idea. Instead of, you have two options. So instead of doing this first option here where you only move transactions and you move current to history inside your current folder, that'll help with the transaction file. But if you have a lot of closed jobs in the master file, you can't move those closed jobs to another folder or another file, inside the same folder. You can't have named master files for job cost. So what I've seen a lot of people do is they'll move current to history, but then they move their jobs out to a different folder. And what happens with that is the transactions that go with that job are not together in the same place with the job, so you can't run reports on it. And so I've come up with this completed job folder document to show you how to create a folder that you can move both jobs and transactions into, where those records are now together, and you can run reports off of older jobs and get all the detail and the totals at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to switch into job cost. All right, so what I've done, I've already created the closed or the completed jobs folder. If you take a look at the completed job folder document on the first page, it talks about using File, New Company to create a brand new data folder. Once that's done, I would go into Open Company and I would make sure that that folder is there, and this is the folder that I've created here. And then I'm going to get the path name to my main data folder, which is Timberline Construction. So right here under Location, this is the path name to where that data in my current folder is stored. So I've gotten that name, and I'm going to switch over here to the Completed Jobs folder. So this is what it would look like then once I have that folder created. Now, the one thing you need to remember is if you're going to run some of the reports and inquiries that come with the software on this folder, some of those reports and inquiries are designed to pull information from accounts payable, from payroll, from general ledger, from equipment, to get the information that you need on the report, as well as the job cost information. So instead of copying all of those files into the completed job folder, what I've done is I've come in under Company Settings in the completed folder. I've gone to File Locations, and I have put the path to those files pointing back to my main data folder. So on page 2 of your document, there is a list of the file record types or file types that you need a path name in. Now, what you can do is you can type in the path name on one of these, and then using the keys on your keyboard, you can do a Control-C for copy, and then go down to the next record or the next file type, and once you're in that field, do a Control-V, and that'll paste. So then just go through the list that I have for you on page 2 and lock in those file types, the path, so that it's pointing back to your main data folder. Once that's done, make sure, I'm going to switch back over here to my main data folder. And if I take a look at, I'm just actually going to do an inquiry here and do a job list here. Make sure that the jobs that need to be moved are marked with a status of closed. Okay. Once that's done, then you can come in the main data folder, go to Tools, Move, and I would move your transactions first and move Current to Current. So we're going to take information out of the current file in our main data folder, and we're going to move it over to the Completed Jobs folder, also in the current file, in the current file. Now, when this comes up, it wants to know the destination. And up here at the top, it's in my main data folder. So I need to switch this to my Completed Jobs folder name. Leave the destination file at the bottom as current and click Open. The first time you run this, you're going to get the prompt that the file is not there in that Completed Jobs folder. Go ahead and click Yes to create. And then once you get this window here, this is very important, use the Conditions button. Index back over to the job record. Scroll down to the status field and make it equal to closed. And then click OK, and then OK again, and then start. The reason we're doing the transactions first is so we can use that condition on the job record to test on. Otherwise, if we move the job first, we don't have a field there to test with. All right, once that's done, we're going to come back into Tools, Move, and this time we're going to move Jobs. Say Yes to continue. Again, our destination is going to be our completed jobs folder. And then if you want to move the commitments, check this box here. It's going to move the commitments as long as the commitment is for a single job number. If the commitment is for multiple jobs, it won't. If it's a one-to-one relationship, it will. Right. Then I'm going to use my conditions again. I'm going to come down and grab status equal to closed. Now, once this is done, I can double check here with inquiry. I can see that my job that was closed is gone. So job number 2 is no longer in my main data folder. If I switch back over to the completed jobs folder, and if I take a look, let's look at lists here, the job is there. And so are the transactions. So if I go into entries, and I go all entries, and I look at the current file, all the entries are there for job number 2. And I'm able to get into this inquiry because, again, the file locations is pointing back to the other folder for the vendor information, the employee information, the general ledger information. Without those file locations, I would be getting prompts that the files, whatever file was needed, was not found. So at this point, I can switch back and forth between my current folder and my completed jobs folder for any information that anybody needs. And the information for those completed jobs is together in one folder. And if someone comes to me and says, ooh, we've got entries coming back in for job number 2, you can move it back. You simply go back the other direction. And if they need the transactions for that job back, you can move both. Move the transactions and the job. Start out in the completed jobs folder. Your destination is going to be back in the main folder. So you can move it back. You can go ahead and process anything that needs to be added to that job, run your reports, even leave that job out there for a while just in case, and then at some point, move it back over to the completed jobs folder. So I'm hoping that gives you an idea of getting your information together in a completed jobs folder, and then again compacting those files so that then again things start to run a little bit faster for you. Because that's one of the bigger complaints that I hear is that why are my reports starting to run so slow? Okay. Residential management, I don't know anything about this program, but if you have it, you're going to make sure you've got everything posted. And then again, it's like property management, it's like job costs. There's no year end. You just run end of month. Same with service management. Actually, you just run your month end reports there. There isn't a close month or close year step in service management. All right, we are up to general ledger. So this is on page 29 in the 2019 book. If you're looking at 2018, it's on page 28. So we have a couple of things to talk about here as far as general ledger. You want to make sure that you've got everything in for 2019. And when I say that, I mean as much as you're aware of. One thing that I don't think you want to do is hold your general ledger open until you get your closing entries from your accountant. Even though you can post 6 months into the future, there isn't any reason for you to hold it open that long because we can always go back and do prior period adjustments. And the reason I'm saying that is because of the reporting inside general ledger. So even though you can go 6 months into the future, you cannot run a financial statement in the future. So you wouldn't be able to run a January financial statement or February if you're on a calendar year. You could still post January and February and March, but the only report that you'll be able to get is a year-to-date ledger using a date range. You can't run a current ledger, you can't run a financial statement, and you can't run the hard-coded trial balance reports. So I would recommend that you run your close year in the same time frame that you run close month. So if you hold general ledger open till the middle of January until everything comes through for AP, for job costs, for payroll, for payables, and then go ahead and close the year. So that's what I mean by record and post all entries for 2019. Just make sure that the interfacing applications have provided everything that they've got. Then make sure, you should be doing this on a monthly basis anyway, but review your new file, the new.glt file, and make sure that everything that is in that new file that needs to be posted is posted. We can, fix or make journal entries to get stuff in that needs to be in, but we need to make sure that there isn't anything left in that new file that we need. Make sure that your suspense accounts are zero. You should be doing that, monthly anyway. Anything that hits your suspense account, you need to research it, figure out why, either correct it in the application that it came from, or do a journal entry to move it to where it belongs. Then run all your reports. Make sure your financial statements balance, your ledgers balance, your trial balance balances. Make sure that you're reconciling or you've reconciled with your other applications. You should be doing this on a monthly basis or even more than that on a regular basis. AP to GL, AR to GL, job cost to GL, payroll, cash management, all of that should be fully reconciled. Then print your financial statements as tentative, make a backup. You might want to get a year-to-date ledger, either print it to paper or get a print file. And I would put a date on it so that you know when that year-to-date ledger was made. Okay. And then close the year. Now, when you close your year, the amount that comes up during the close year should balance to your net profit or loss. So if it doesn't, let's go in and take a look here. All right. The first thing that I would have you check is come in under Setup, and depending on how you're set up, if you're set up with no prefixes, go straight to Accounts. Otherwise, go into Prefix Base Accounts. Oops, and I'm in the wrong folder here. Hold on. I need to make sure I'm down here. Okay. Make sure that this account type is correct on every base account. Sometimes what I see happen is new accounts are added during the year, the default account type is an asset. And if you're adding an income, cost, or expense account, then that account number is not going to be included in the net income or loss when you run close year. So I would just use your next button, and I would go through and just keep clicking it, make sure that each of these accounts have the right type. Make sure that all the assets are marked as assets. Make sure that the liabilities are all marked as liabilities. When you get into the income accounts, let's get down there. Actually, okay. Make sure that the bullet jumps across, and then when you get down into the cost accounts, make sure the bullet drops down. Okay. If this is marked incorrectly, change the base account, and then you will have to come in under Setup Accounts, and you will have to change the account type on the full account. Just changing the base does not fix the actual full generated account, so you have to fix it in two places. All right, so that's the first thing. If you come in and do the close fiscal year, and it tells you that your prefix is not at year end, but the entry down below it says that you've got entries that were made to a prior year, go ahead and say okay to that, and it's going to come up and show you the total for that prior year adjustment. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you so that you see what that screen looks like. All right. Okay. Now, the other thing to check, if the number that comes up is not your net income or loss amount, it could be that the financial statement is incorrect. So that would be the next thing. So after you double check all of the account types, then the next thing to double check is your financial statement itself. And I've seen this happen too. So you have added new accounts during the year, but you ignored the message about checking your financial statement design. One of the things you need to double check is your accumulator for net income or loss. Make sure that the range of account numbers on this grid matches the actual range of account numbers in your master file, or it's high enough to include any new accounts that you add. So what I would always recommend is that you come in here maybe from the beginning and change this. You can make this as high as you want. The account numbers don't have to actually exist. So make this like this, and maybe even delete this range here. Actually, maybe make this 6999, and then on this line, delete that range out of there. So I'm adding up any income account between 4001 and 4,999, and I'm subtracting any cost or expense account between 5,001 and 6,999. So I can add account numbers during the year, and it'll be fine. I'll be in balance. Okay. All right, so two things to check then. When you go to close the year, initially close the year, make sure that your financial statement net income or loss is the same number that comes up when you run the close year. Now, what happens when you close the year? What happens to your files when that happens? Right? It's going to create entries in your history file. Every income and expense account that it closes, it posts an entry to the retained earnings account, and that entry goes into your history file. And then for those income and expense accounts, it zeroes out the current balance and then it rolls the activity on the activity tab. So I'm going to show you that in just a minute. All the year-end balances get moved forward by 1 year. It advances your year-ending and period-ending dates on your prefixes, depending on where you've set your fiscal entity at. It moves the activity fields again by 1 period, and then it pulls in a new future field, and it adds that future field to your current balance. So let's jump back in here into General Ledger, and let me show you what I'm talking about here. So on the account itself, and let's look at this is an asset. So what happens on an asset, the current balance does not get zeroed out. Assets and liabilities, the current balance stays the same. What it does do is it moves the activity. So it takes whatever was here at the bottom and it moves it up to the top. Everything moves down by 1 here at the bottom, moves it up to the top, moves everything back down in the lower left-hand, right-hand corner. That value goes away. Over here, it takes the current balance and it drops it into year-end 1 year ago. And then all of these buckets, year-end 1 through 5 and 6 through 10, all go away. Or I'm sorry, not go away, they all roll down. Year 10 goes away. Prior year adjustments, this should be blank. Year-to-date net change, this will zero out. On an asset and liability account, this is the field that you can look at to see what your year-to-date net activity is for that account. On a income, cost, or expense account, this current balance field gets put back to 0. And then that current balance field actually moves down to year-end 1 year ago and then does exactly the same thing that the other account type did. The difference between a profit and loss account and the asset and a balance sheet account is how it handles that current balance field. Okay. Now, what happens when you finally do get your entries for year end, and maybe it's 2, 3, 4, 5 months later? So what we're going to do, these are the steps that we're going to walk through. You're going to, again, make a backup of your data, because especially in General Ledger, closing a year or a month in General Ledger is traumatic to that master file. It is moving things, rolling things, around to get ready for the new year or the new month. And so if something happens during that process, there is no recovery from that. So we have to have a backup that we can go to. Then we're going to use tasks open close posting period, and we're going to open the period that we want these entries to be posted to. So it will be our December of last year. We're going to use tasks record entries to post or to record that entry. If we're set to a manual post, we're going to run tasks post, or we're going to say yes to post it when we hit the finish button. Or if we're automatic post, it just automatically posts when we hit finish. I put another backup in here just in case you want to, make double sure. You can back it up again. Then you're going to run tasks close fiscal year. It's going to prompt you that you're not at the end of the year, but it has found that there were prior adjustments made, and so it's going to tell you that that's what it's going to close to retained earnings. And you're going to accept that. Then you're going to go ahead and reprint financial statements and reprint any ledgers that you need, because you can go back and reprint current ledgers using the year-to-date ledger option with modified date range. You can reprint those reports. And with financial statements, you can roll back and reprint the December financial statement. And then lastly, you're going to go back into task open close posting period and mark that period back as being closed. So let's go take a look again in General Ledger. Okay. All right, so we're going to pretend that we've done our backup. We're going to come in here under Tasks, Open Close Posting Period. Okay. And we're sitting in January. We closed December of 2015. This is the sample data, so it's back in the past. I'm going to check the box to uncheck that box to open up December. So this December could be farther down in the list. You just need to open up that December period. Then go ahead and accept it. Then we can come back in with tasks, record entries. We can use that December date. And I'm just going to pick, let's see, maybe I'll do a WIP entry. You're going to get a warning that this is for a prior period. You're going to say OK to that warning. Now we can put in an amount. We can put in a journal entry, a journal number if you're using those, a reference, a description. Okay. And then I'm going to grab an expense account here. Again, warning that it's for a prior period. Okay. Once I have my journal entry complete, I'm going to hit Finish. I'm going to tell it to post. I'll watch to make sure that it's finished. Now, I can rerun reports. I could rerun a financial statement. Any one of the financial statements. Just use the rollback and roll back as many periods as you need to get back to December, and then you can reprint your statement. Okay. If you're doing ledgers and you want to replace the current ledger, you can do a modified date range, and again, put your date range in. And you could run this multiple times to reprint multiple ledgers depending on how many months you've gone ahead and how many of these you actually want to keep a copy of. Okay. Once you have that done, then you're going to come in under Tasks, and this is the step that a lot of people will forget. You'll do your prior year adjustment, and then you think everything's going great. You get to the end of the current month, you go to run your reports, and you're out of balance. Your ledger is out of balance, your trial balance is out of balance, your financial statement is out of balance. It's because you need to run the close year again. And you see this message now? Prior year's adjustments will be closed. It's telling me prefix not at close year. The system is smart enough to know if I run this and I'm not at the end of the year, it's going to tell me you're not at the end of the year. And if there's nothing else if there are no prior year adjustments, this screen right here is going to be 0. Okay. So this is the amount that it's going to reclose to retained earnings. This is the amount of my journal entry that I made. Now you might get this message because here's what the system is looking for. It's looking for any account that has a number in the prior year adjustment field in the master file. And that field exists on your asset and liability accounts. So if you get that message that we just saw about prior year adjustments, but the number that comes up here is 0, just accept it and then run close year again. So I'm talking about now the first time that you run the close year when this comes up and it says 0 because of prior year adjustments to those account types. So here, just accept. Okay. and then you want to come back to open close posting period and close and mark this period as closed. You're not going to run close month again to do this. You want to come back in here under open close posting period and check the box on that period to mark it as being closed. Okay, maintenance for general ledger, same as the other modules. Go ahead and move your transactions current to history. You know, I think it's up to you if you want to. I don't see that much trouble leaving transactions in the current file in general ledger. I don't see reports slowing down as much as I see it in the other modules. I probably wouldn't leave, like 10 years worth of stuff in that current file. You might want to, every other year move current to history, and even do, date ranges or conditions for that. And then again, compact your files when you're done. All right, we're ready to move on into payroll. So for those of you that do not have the payroll module, this is the last application that we're going to talk about. So if feel free to go ahead and leave us, and thank you for joining us. If you do have payroll, though, you want to stay right where you are, and we're going to go ahead and start going through that application. Payroll is actually the first module in the year-end guide books. Page 10 in both 2018 and 2019 year-end guides is where payroll starts. All right, so you should be getting your paper lined up, your perforated paper, if you're going to be printing the W-2 forms yourself. You're going to need to make sure that everything is entered for 2019. The final payroll is run. Any manual checks have been recorded that need to be entered in. And then we're going to talk here in a minute about W-2 formats. I am going to show you that. I showed it in the Atrix class. I'm going to show it again here in this session. Okay. In January, you again want to make sure all of your reports have been printed. So these are things like your subject to reports, quarterly reports. You want to make sure that payroll is reconciled. You're going to get a good backup. I'm going to show you how to make a prior year payroll folder and what to copy into it. And then you need to decide when you want to print your W-2 forms. And this is just going to be whatever is most comfortable for you. Some people will make a prior year folder, and that's where they run their W-2s from. Others will go ahead. You've got to close the year in payroll before you can post your first payroll in 2020. So you can run W-2s off of last year's amounts. So the backup folder that we're going to create could just be just for that, just to do, to look stuff up from last year, but not necessarily use it to print the forms. You can print forms off of the last year fields in your master file. So we're going to take a look at that too when we look at setting up the W-2 forms. So it just is what's most comfortable to you as far as running the forms. Do you want to do it in your current folder using last year totals, or do you want to switch and go to your other folder and run it off of your completed or last year's payroll folder? All right, for W-2s, you need to make sure you have the year-end release installed. I would run a test run to blank paper. Okay, and you can run test runs as many times as you want. You'll run your final forms again through Atrix, and you can either print those yourself and send them out. There's no charge for that. or you can let Atrix do it, and there will be a charge for that. And they can e-file the forms for you, and they even offer a service where they will mail out the forms to you, and they offer that service for your 1099s as well. Right, then before you close the year, you need to make sure that any pays, deductions, or fringes that you need to carry over into the new year, that they're marked to be retained. So if you have anything that's accruing and you need that accrual to continue, mark those. If you have any deductions that have limits where maybe the person has taken out a loan and they have not fully paid it back yet, make sure that's marked to be retained. Right. And again, make sure you have a good backup and then close your year. And I forgot to change the slide. So you want to download your 2020 tax file and update taxes, and then verify that the taxes are updated before you run that first payroll. Now let me show you kind of a trick here. Because we know that the tax tables have been updated and that is out there, you can download your taxes now before you finish the last payroll of 2019. When you run the download, do not check this box to update taxes when the download is complete. It's going to download the file that it uses to update those taxes into your folder. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to call this download tax. Okay. And it tells you when you're ready, you need to update. Now, you don't have to worry about remembering to do that. Let me close out a payroll and show you what happens here. Every time you go into payroll, it's going to tell you. It knows that this file should not be there. So you need, what I would recommend is that you do the download now so that the tax file is there. And then when you get ready to go into payroll to do your first run for 2020, it warns you that you need to update. And at that point, when you're ready, you can run update. So this is giving me that warning so that I don't forget, so that when I go to do that first payroll, I've got the right tax table. All right, I'm going to watch to make sure that it's done. And then I would recommend that you verify that it's done. And you do that by going into Setup, Taxes, Tax Rates, and just look at federal withholding. Look at the effective date down in the lower right-hand corner. Should say 2020. That's how you can tell that the taxes have been updated. Okay. All right. And then move your checks to history after you've got your W-2s run. And then you can also move terminated employees, get those moved out to a separate folder, and then, again, compact your files. Now, one of the handouts that we included with the web is creating a prior year payroll folder. So I want to go ahead and get back into payroll and show you. Now, what I did here is I've already created a file, and I would just put the year on it. I created a folder called 2019 Payroll. And then again, I wrote down the path name to my main data folder. This is basically the same thing that we did for our job cost folder. All right. Oops. Let me go back and open that back up here. And then go into File, company settings, file locations, and put your file locations in. On page 2, I have a list of the files that you're going to need that path name in, so that you can run reports and inquiries in this folder. Because obviously the whole purpose of this folder is for you to be able to go back and look up somebody from last year. Look up to see, what their checks were, what their totals were, and some of those reports and inquiries have references to cash management or equipment or job costs or general ledger. And so this will eliminate those errors that you get when it says that the file is not found. Right, so you will go ahead and set those path names, and then you'll switch back into your main data folder. And again, you're going to use Tools, File Tools to do your backup. So this is what you're going to use anytime you make these little small backups in any of the applications. You're going to use Tools, File Tools to back these files up instead of using Windows Explorer. Windows Explorer does not get all the bits and pieces that you need for each of these different files. So you need to make sure that this is what you're using to make these small backups prior to doing any closings. Right, on this first window, you're going to change this to copy. We're going to copy files from our main data folder into our 2019 payroll folder. And then you'll hit the next button. It's going to bring up a screen where you're going to tell it which files you want to back up. So you're going to use the Add Files button. And I would do these files one at a time. So I would come in and grab the current file, and right here, all you have to do down here in the file name is just start typing in the name of the file. So I want the current.prt, and I click to open it, and it pulls it in. I'm going to add files again. This time I want master, and I want master.prm. And I also want system. Get that down here. I'm sorry, I should click add files first. I want system. This is so that you have a backup. This file here holds all your setups for your pays, deductions, fringes, some of the customization that you do. So you want to make sure that you get a copy of this file as well. And then lastly, I would add in here your tax file. So you have a copy of your 2019 tax file. So I already updated my taxes, so this is going to be 2020, but that's okay. Okay. So these are the 4 files. Then you'll click the destination, you'll click Browse, and you will browse out to your new folder. So I'm going to click, and for those of you that have never used this before, you're going to have to know again what your full path name is, and you need access to that path. And right here's what you're going to get. So I'm going to OK that, and then you'll hit Next. And you're looking for green lights. This red light you'll get if there are already files in that folder and you want to go ahead and overwrite them, just click OK. I've already done this before, so I'm going to say overwrite. We'll just overwrite everything. And it's copied everything over. So now I have the files that I need to research payroll for last year in this last year payroll folder. Okay. Now at this point, I could go ahead if I'm, I've got to do my first payroll for 2020, so I could go ahead and run tasks, close year, and it's going to roll my master file into 2020. And then I can run my W-2s off of last year. So I'm going to go ahead and actually do that. Okay. Now let's take a look here for a second at the W-2 forms. So even though we're running the W-2s out of Atrix, Atrix still looks at the form that we set up for Sage 300. We can use the same form over and over again for every year. You do not have to create a form for each year. And I would just recommend use the default. Put a penny in the employee minimum because you don't want to run W-2s for employees that didn't work for the year. Use the amounts tab to get over to what looks almost like the form. Okay. Now, what you need to be careful of, if you're going to run your W-2s within the current master file and you've already closed the year and you've got information printing in boxes 12 and 14, you need to make sure that you've got a formula in here that actually picks up the 401k or whatever it is using the prior year fields. If you have just selected the deduct right off the deducts list, that is the current year. And if you've closed the year, it's not going to print correctly on your form. So what you want to make sure you do is that you create a formula, and I'm going to actually, let me think I could do a formula with this on here. Let me do tools, formulas. You want to create a new formula where you do a lookup. Oops. And you index out to the employee deduct. I'm just going to use the 401k as an example here. Index out to the employee deduct record. Find prior year deduction. This is the field that you need. And then you need to base it on the employee record. And it needs to be the name of the 401k. And I'm going to call this prior 401k. Okay. Right now, on my W-2 form, instead of pulling in the current year, I want the prior year. So I've got a formula name in here instead. So that when I run the W-2 forms, when I tell it that I'm running this off the prior year, when you run the form, it's going to ask you what year are you running. You're going to select 2019. These buckets up here for these boxes, for boxes 1 through 6, it knows to go get last year automatically. But boxes 12 through 14, it does not know. So you need a formula in here that will tell it to go get the previous year's amount. Okay, and then you just go ahead and save that. Okay. And so again, you do not need a form for every single year. You might have a form that is current year and then one that says prior year. So depending on where you're running the W-2s from, you can pick and choose. If you have multiple W-2 forms created, when you run the W-2s through Atrix, it will ask you to pick the form that you want to use. If not, it will default to whatever form name is out here. If there's only one form name, and the form name doesn't have to be default. You could delete this and create a form called W-2. It knows if there's only one form to use that form. Okay. All right, well, we're done a little bit early today. So some tips again. The year-end release is out there now. sagecity.com/year-end is where you can find it. You want to grab the 18.4.1 version and download it. And then, if you're doing it yourself, this of course has to be installed at the server, at the if you're using a terminal server or you've got workstations directly connected, you've got to go through the steps. You might have a consultant that will come out and help you, or your IT person who has installed before may be the one that does this for you. The year-end guide for 2019 is out there. It's again in the same place, sagecity.com/year-end. Sage does have live chat, so if you're trying to get through to Sage to ask some questions, and they're fairly simple questions maybe, and you don't want to have to wait on hold on the phone, if you go into, let me show you where it is here. If you go into Help Live Chat, all you have to do is put in your name and email and a question, and then click on Chat with Analyst, and you go out into the queue, and it'll show you how many people are ahead of you, and then you can just text message back and forth with whichever analyst picks up your question. All right. And again, close your dates for us and for Sage, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. Okay. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope that we gave you some nice tips and good information for closing the year. If you have any questions right now, if you'd like to type those into the chat area, Tina can read those to me right now if you have any questions. If you think of something later, just go ahead and email Tina or Lori, and they will forward that on to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have if you think of something later. So, Tina, is there anything in there now?
Nope, don't see any.
Okay. All right. Well, again, before we close the meeting out, on this GoToMeeting panel under handouts, there are 5 handouts out there. I would go ahead and copy those down so that you have the year-end guide for 2018. You've got the handout for creating these folders for job cost and for payroll. And there's also, I copied down the knowledge base article for logging into Sage City and setting yourself up to get the alerts. So I'll give you, before we close this, I'll give you a couple minutes to get those downloaded so that you have those handy. So Tina, I think we can probably go ahead and close out the meeting. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you guys have a good year end, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's.